So the McLaren Formula One team have had to publicly deny reports that they'll let Donald Trump drive their Formula One car. No, that's an actual article that exists on the internet. Anyway, I wonder how Twitter have taken the news. Yeah, that's more or less what I expected.
That's rude.
Hey there guys, I'm Will and welcome to the Comedy Review, the show hated so badly by Mohammed Ben Sulayem that he had my channel hacked. Don't worry, I can always rely on you guys for support through the most stressful week of my life. Excuses, keep it up and you'll be the next FIA president. Should have been a massive salad attack. Got punished for greed. It does explain the recent increase in quality. Oh, go f*** yourself. Anyway, it's also the show where we talk about things that happen in motorsport. Things like this. Yuki Tsunoda discovers he's going to Formula E, Alex Albon creams everywhere, and F1 Academy go racing in Canada. And if you're wondering where the joke is here, come on, I'm not a f***ing idiot. Quite a bit of news to get into this week, and we start here. Max Verstappen caused quite a stir at the Spanish Grand Prix, the Dutchman dozing off in the closing stages and daydreaming about violently murdering the cast of Toy Story.
Buzz! We missed the truck! We're not aiming for the truck!
The move was so bad, the Dutchman was later seen apologising for the first time in his life over social media. Regardless, F1 stewards took a very dim view on the situation, handing Verstappen a time penalty and 3 points on his licence, bringing him just one short of a race ban. Usually that would dominate the headlines on Thursday media day, though fortunately for the Red Bull driver, Lance Stroll exists. Following his withdrawal from the Spanish Grand Prix and the growing rumours that said withdrawal was less to do with a pre-existing hand injury and more to do with Lance treating his garage equipment like a 1950s housewife, many were rather surprised to see the Canadian fit enough to return so soon for his home Grand Prix. Plenty others were less than thrilled, including the likes of potential replacements Valtteri Bottas and Felipe Drugovich, as well as apparently Stroll himself, who didn't look at all like he wanted to grasp the opportunity with both hands. Granted, that was probably because one of them doesn't work. Lance at least has the positive of being able to do all his talking on the track. That wouldn't quite be the same for Frederic Vasseur, who has to rely on Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc to save his career after Italy's media decided to unceremoniously f*** the living daylights out of him in the build-up to the race. Ferrari's start to the 2025 season has been a bit like Air India Flight 171. It never really got off the ground. That means the Ferrari cult needs a sacrifice, and poor Freddie V has found himself in the hot seat. But don't worry, Ferrari were quick to dispel the rumours as something that wasn't even worth commenting on, which will be a great line to return to when the Frenchman is sent to the Maranello gallows midway through the season. We're almost done with the news then, but lastly we need to take a trip to FIA Corner, which of course means it's the grand return of this.
What the fuck have the FIA done this week? Oh, Mohammed, what the fuck have you done now?
We could possibly do a whole video on Ben Sulayem's antics this week. Long-standing steward Derek Warwick has been suspended for having an opinion. We got our first look at the 2026 calendar, which includes a direct clash with the Indy 500, so cheers, I now want to kill myself. And then there's the tiny matter of Big Ben now being allowed to veto any competition to his presidential candidacy. I commented on this news a few weeks back when it was simply a recommendation that we were all laughing at because there was no possible way this would be voted into power. But no, as it turns out, the governing body are now a dictatorship. Ben 10 can theoretically hold on to power till the end of time, and now I'm hearing reports that a new summer camp has been set up at Auschwitz for anyone who owns a conspicuous piercing. Ladies and gentlemen, it's happened again. Anyway, that's enough news. I think it's time we get to first practice. I missed the first 3 minutes of FP1, but Belgrano boy had managed to f*** it up already. Newly nicknamed Collar Spinto was the subject of plenty of speculation this week, with team boss Flavio Briatore suggesting the Argentinian could be the next up-and-coming rookie to be axed midway through the season. And granted, the Argentine wasn't helping himself on Friday, spending most of the early running being what other F1 drivers might describe as f***ing annoying. Things were looking equally not good for Ferrari's Charles Leclerc, who despite all of the speculation opted to try this Grand Prix in hard mode as he ripped half his car off early on into the session. With the Monegasque now out for both Friday practice sessions as a result, all of Vasseur's hopes and dreams lied in the hands of Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, maybe I'd start updating that CV, mate. So as #Bless discovered it was much easier to go quicker by simply straightlining the final chicane, Williams' Alex Albon was busy trying to put Sauber driver Gabriel Bortoleto out of his misery, then even coming over the radio to claim, quote,
I tried to do the right thing there.
Alex may well have been on a warpath in this one, but was at least able to come home as part of a Williams 2-3 by the checkered flag, only beaten by reigning world champion Max Verstappen. And if you're wondering where our usual tinge of papaya is, well, Norris was too busy looking for ideal bottling locations throughout FP1. While we're on the subject of McLaren, Lando, do you want to marry me? OMG, my boyfriend doesn't want to. Firstly, I'm not surprised, you're a Lando Norris fan. Secondly, what a cuck. And thirdly, Lando rejected them on the live feed, but don't worry, they're pretty used to disappointment by this stage. Let's get to FP2 then, and you know what, thank God Lance Stroll is fit enough to come back. If not, we wouldn't be able to laugh at him crashing into the wall just 10 minutes into the session. Meanwhile, Colapinto was busy building in some consistency, which as it turns out isn't always a good thing, and Pierre Gasly almost contracted the bottle by being too close to Lando Norris. Who knew this shit was airborne? Mercedes were turning up the wick, however, George Russell fastest, with Antonelli backing him up in third. With Albon and Sainz also up there again for Williams, we looked to have an interesting Saturday on our hands. But before that, I think it's about time we found out who's our ex-bell end of the week. With a 2-week gap, there's plenty of options to pick from this time round. There was this degenerate who's clearly never watched the Indy 500 before, there was this guy who claimed Piastri was in the Epstein files, and there was this Lance Stroll fan who could have just won it for being a Lance Stroll fan. But then there was F1J UK, with 2 Ys, the second one standing for why the f*** hasn't natural selection caught up with you yet? Jay here has picked an interesting hill to die on, claiming that Max Verstappen's move in Spain was completely justified, because he was ahead at the apex. I mean, do I even need to add anything here? Actually, I really don't. Twitter's done that for me. Obese tramp, let the kids out of your dungeon. Shut up, you freak. Cry harder. And finally, I'm pretty certain this guy's been an ex-bell end of the week himself in the past, but he's redeemed himself somewhat with this comment. Big ups to 7True for the recommendation, and if you'd like to nominate the next ex-bell end of the week, use the hashtag on screen, tag me on the platform, or join our new Discord server. Now let's move on to FP3. Oh look, it's Mohammed Ben Sulayem. Oscar Piastri hadn't made much of an impact so far this weekend, until he did, only it was into the wall of champions. That caused grief for Red Bull driver Yuki Tsunoda, who passed a stricken McLaren on his way back to the pits, though this technically still counts as overtaking under red flag conditions and earned the Japanese pilot a 10th-place grid drop. I'm assuming his reaction to the news looked a little something like this. Just before the Piastri incident, Nico Hülkenberg had his own close shave at the final corner, a spin which in turn caused Davide Valsecchi to piss himself. The Haas F1 team are celebrating 200 Grand Prix in Canada this time out. Sorry, I meant to mention that earlier, but as usual I've forgotten they still exist. Anyway, Ollie Behrman was another to hark back through the outfit's history, attempting his best Romain Grosjean impressions as he scraped the wall of champions on a number of occasions over the final practice hour. Also, the fact that Haas are now capable of doing throwback liveries makes me feel old and morbidly sick. Still no mention of Rich Energy in their 200 race history, now I wonder why that might be. Norris would top the final session then ahead of Leclerc and Russell, setting us up with a thrilling qualifying session that afternoon with multiple teams in the mix. One of them might even have been the Williams pair, only Sainz encountered the newly installed Hadjar chicane, and Albon's FW47 identified as a stripper. I guess that also means it's time for one of these. When the session resumed, Sainz will be joined in the drop zone by Bortoletto, Lawson, Gasly and Stroll. Aston Martin now in a race against time to cover anything valuable in the garage with bubble wrap. Q2 meanwhile would start with controversy, with Yuki Tsunoda doing his best to try and get some of his buddies to join him on the back row of the grid. George Russell was excused for passing the Red Bull driver on pit exit, despite the 22 Red Bull car travelling at what he perceives to be racing speed. His day would then get worse when he was eliminated in Q2. This meanwhile, Colapinto had the crowd on his feet as he finished 12th. Joining them would be Hülkenberg and the Haas pair, as all eyes turned to the top 10 shootout. The revitalised Lando Norris will be under pressure early on here, 2 tenths down on Piastri in the middle sector, which means it's time to sit back, relax, and yep, there's another one for the bottle counter in 2025. Piastri would take over at the top then, only to be usurped by the Red Bull of Verstappen by 25 thousandths of a second. So, with Lando being reminded that his brake pedal still exists over the team radio, we were ready for where it really mattered, the final set of runs. And well, would you look at that, it's a multi-pack of bottles this weekend. Not inability to drive left the Briton down in 7th, and thus McLaren's only hope lied with teammate Piastri, who pulled out a monster of a final sector to go quickest with 30 seconds remaining in the session. Verstappen was still on the lap, however, cruelly pipping the Aussie once again, and that looked to be the end of things. We said that in 2024 as well, and 1 year later, George Russell was still on the flyer, taking pole away in the dying moments and giving me 24 hours to salivate over my computer screen at the front row for Sunday. With George joking that he had a few more penalty points to play with, and Max conversely telling the media more bluntly to just piss off, this was going to be a fun one. And before we get to that, I do want to quickly plug my F1 podcast again, because if I do it at the end, you all seem to f*** off and ignore me for some reason. TalkShift is almost at 5,000 subscribers, and if you want to hear more from me, I'd really appreciate you checking it out using the link in the description below. Right, shameless plug over. Now let's get to race day. George Russell made the best start off the line, leading into turn 1 as Verstappen slotted into second, and Antonelli pulled out the championship card to scare Piastri off the rostrum. Slightly further back, Alex Albon was on the move, albeit backwards, as Colapinto forced him onto the F1 Academy racing line. The early stages of the race saw Lando Norris trying his best to unf*** his Sunday, and first on the agenda was Fernando Alonso, who'd actually had a cracking qualifying. Don't worry, 5-year-olds and my 0.4% female audience, Lord knows it wasn't that bad. Next up on the Britain's hit list was Lewis Hamilton, although #blessed was suffering from much bigger problems, taking out his Ferrari frustration on a poor old groundhog that left it hurtling into low Earth orbit, and Lewis with floor damage for the remainder of this one. The man he replaced at the Scuderia wasn't really enjoying himself either, Sainz taking up Albon's Friday job of abusing poor Bortoletto. The Spaniard was at least slowly working his way through the field though, getting past his teammate on lap 20, as Albon continued to plummet down the order on worn tyres. The team asked the 23 car to pit at this stage, though Alex was adamant on doing his own thing. It was only after Special managed to make his way past the Williams driver that Albon realised he might just be ever so slightly f***ed, the tyre driver finally boxing with only hopes of a decent finishing position next to Lando Norris's title challenge in the bin. Sorry, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, aren't I? This was turning into a strategic race of sorts. Granted, that's just a polite way of calling it shit, but there were contrasting opinions over whether the 1 or 2 stop was the way to go. Charles Leclerc had spent most of his weekend sideways by this point, but stayed out longer, if not only to pretend like he was a leading contender for a little bit. Ferrari then forgot about the 2 compound tyre rule, so that's curtains on this one. From here on out, the race got very strategic, and what we really needed was a safety car. Alex Albon could have done that, but no, the tyre driver decided to be useless even in retirement. We jump ahead 20 laps then, where all that's happened is Lawson's also pulled over for the day, and finally the front of the field is beginning to reunite. Russell and Verstappen were pretty safe in the top 2, but the final spot on the podium was well and truly up for grabs. Kimi Antonelli held on to that position, but the pair of McLarens were right on his tail, Piastri leading a charging Norris as we got into the final 5 laps of the Grand Prix. Norris threw a surprise move down the inside of the hairpin at turn 10, catching Piastri off guard, though the 81 car got the better exit out of the final corner, and the pair went side by side down the back straight. Piastri then took the position back, thanks mainly to an understanding over how to use the brake pedal, though Lando set himself back up for a move into turn 1. Piastri saw this and covered the inside, and Lando must have been spending too much time in the 2026 simulator, and that's the only excuse I can think of over why his minuscule excuse with brain came to the conclusion that he could fit through here. Actually, never mind, the Nico Rosberg curse seems to have struck again. As the paddock looked on in shock at this masterclass in head loss, the safety car was out to wrap this one up, giving us a final bit of drama as George Russell chose violence and forced Verstappen to overtake him under the yellows. An anticlimactic finish then as the Briton came across the line to take his first win since Las Vegas last year, Verstappen coming home in second, and my driver of the day, Kimi Antonelli, rounding out the top 3 to take his first podium in Formula 1. Further shout-outs had to go to Alonso, Hülkenberg, Ocon and Sainz for making up ground in the top 10, but really here the big talking point has to surround Lando Norris. Not only did he just castrate his title challenge, but he also took away the one part of this Grand Prix that could actually have been interesting. That said, he's probably hiked up this video's viewing figures, so cheers for that, but it's a 5 out of 10 race rating for me on this one. Let me know what you thought of the Canadian Grand Prix down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video even slightly more than the race itself, I'd appreciate it if you dropped it a like, got subscribed to the channel, and helped TalkShift get to 5,000 subscribers as well. We've got plenty of IndyCar coming up over the next couple of weeks before F1 returns in Austria, and I'm sure I'll be able to find something to waffle about in the meantime as well. Now, it's too late for me, so I could stay up and wait to see if the plethora of drivers currently under investigation get penalties, or I could just sleep. Actually, I think I am going to go do that, so you lot can tell me what's aged poorly in the comments, then f*** off.